All right. Hey, let's have a Bible study. Go ahead and take your Bibles out, turn them to Nehemiah, and we're going to be looking in chapter 4. Good to have you on board. My name is Mike Holmes. I'm the interim pastor here, Sinclair Baptist, and glad that you could join us for this style of Bible study. It's a little different than how some have done, but this is set up to be discussion-oriented, and we want you all to talk. It's we have a little rule in our groups. It's like one person doesn't do all the talking, and everybody does some of the talking. So make sure that you participate at some level, and we're going to dive into these questions. But as always, we need to make sure we read the chapter that we're working on. We are in episode 10, but that got us all the way to chapter 4. So let's take a moment now and go ahead and turn to Nehemiah chapter 4, and we'll have a moment of quiet here, and you can read chapter 4, and then we'll dive into 4 different questions that I have kind of pulled out of this section of text. The main questions, if you want to read kind of the area, are going to be verses 9 through about 14 is where we're going to kind of pull most of the questions, but some of them kind of go back and pull from everything that you've learned about Nehemiah. So let's take time and read Nehemiah. All right, hope you made it through the chapter there, at least got those verses read, 9 through 14, and got some questions here that I'm going to be asking you, and this is, I wrote these down and want to share them with you and kind of think these through. This first one really kind of spans back across a bit of the book of Nehemiah. And I wrote this, that prayer is often mentioned in the book of Nehemiah. Many times he just, boom, shoots right off into a prayer or says, I prayed a certain amount of time or whatever. So here's kind of a broader question. What do you think were some of the topics in Nehemiah's prayer? And this is not necessarily, you have to think about it. Some of them, the topics are mentioned in the prayer. So you're actually, but I want to just kind of go back through. What are some of the topics that Nehemiah was praying about? And then more specifically in this question is, how do you think it was worded in the verse 9 prayer? It's like, what were some of maybe the specifics that were mentioned there? So let's talk about Nehemiah's prayers that we know about so far, the ones we've read, and let's kind of try to think of what he might have been saying, some of the exact words he might have been saying based on what we read there in verse 9. All right, interesting. It's always interesting to kind of go back and dig through the scriptures. There's many of the prayers that we've covered already, and there's actually quite a few more in the rest of the book. And we want to encourage you to read the rest of the book. We're not going to cover the entire book. We won't have time in this Bible study. We're just kind of covering the wall building portion. But read them and maybe highlight them. Maybe get a blue highlighter or something whenever there's a prayer, kind of make a mark there. So, all right, let's jump into the next question here. In verse 10, it gives us some insight into the actual building of the wall. There's a little bit of kind of couple hints there of what was kind of going on. So this first question is, what are the categories of workers that you think were needed for the project? So just kind of sort of create a list. If you're going to build a wall, well, we need someone to find some rocks, and we need someone to carry some rocks and stack some rocks, So you got finders, stackers, and carriers, But try to list all the different people that would be needed to build a particular wall. And then the other thing that we find in this verse is there were some obstacles. What are some of the obstacles that could come based on the workers and based on what's going on? I want you to just kind of really envision what it would be like to physically build a wall. What kind of workers and what kind of obstacles and materials, would you need or would be hard to find to make all that happen? So let's just talk about what it takes to build a physical wall there. So take a moment and dive into those questions. All right, moving along here. This is kind of interesting. In verse 13, Nehemiah kind of mentions something that it's a little bit unusual. You don't necessarily think of it. In chapter 3, we found a couple times where some guys were building the walls with their daughters. is sort of mentioned specifically here. But in verse 13, it says, Nehemiah recruited families to be working together and to be guarding the wall, kind of the clan idea, like, hey, you guys work on this part and your family works on that part, and kind of a neat idea. And so I have a couple questions I wrote based on that. What do you think might be the benefit of this? So what did really benefit of working together as a family in that type of arena? And then here's a question. This is sort of a little brainstorm for the local ministry, but what are there ways in our local ministry that we could do family things? What are some ways that we could, get families involved and actually serve more as families? So bat that one around a little bit at your table there. Take some time, think about that, and come up with some ideas. All right, question 4. We've got all the way to question 4 here. Let me just read it. It says, Nehemiah recognized that there was need for a pep talk amongst the leaders and the workers. And if you read this, you'll kind of see that that's exactly what happened. If you were on this project, how often would you want to be encouraged by the leadership? Now, here's the problem. We know this is a big wall, and they had to work all the way around. Nehemiah wasn't able to be there all the time. But how often do you need encouragement? If you were on this one, how often would you want it? That's sort of a good question. And then what do you think were some of the most encouraging points that Nehemiah could make to his people? So while he's building the wall, what would be some of the encouraging things that he would say? Now, there's a few in this verse here, but there's others that obviously happened and actually were mentioned in other places. But how often do you want to be encouraged? Then what do you like to hear concerning the encouragement? So take that one and think about that one. All right. I hope you've enjoyed some of this here. We're going to take some time now and have some prayer. So go ahead and in your groups there or with your spouse, whoever you're with, take a moment and pray. And some of the content here that we've talked about, working together as families, or they kind of really were kind of in a fight, in the first part of the chapter, verse 9. There was some fighting going on, so that prayer was very specific about that. And maybe you have some battles, and maybe you need to be praying about those and asking God for strength, and maybe you need to ask God for some encouragement. So take a moment and pray. And enjoy the time praying together with your friends there around the table. And God bless you, and we will see you the next time here as we get into episode 11 as we finish up the rest of chapter 4.